Hello and welcome to Views on News. I am Jawad. Tehami. Pakistan's Foreign Office has demanded the interim Afghan authorities to take immediate, robust and effective action against the perpetrators of the Banu cantonment terrorist attack in which 8 military personnel got martyred. The deputy head of the mission of the embassy of Afghanistan in Islamabad was delivered a strong démarche according to Foreign Office, and the Foreign Office urged the interim Afghan authorities to fully investigate this particular incident and prevent a recurrence of such attacks against Pakistan using the territory of Afghanistan. Regarding this particular attack on Banu cantonment, Inter-Services Public Relations released a statement. Let me quote an excerpt from that. The heinous act of terrorism has been undertaken by Hafiz Gul Bahadur Group, which operates from Afghanistan and has used Afghan soil to orchestrate acts of terrorism inside Pakistan in the past as well, unquote. I will also be talking about Pakistan condemning the dastardly terrorist attack on Imam Barga in Muscat, Oman, the responsibility of which has been claimed by ISIS. When we talk about the political deputy prime minister in Afghanistan, Maulvi Abdul Kabir, he has claimed that Islamic Emirate has the complete authority in 34 provinces. Also, with the acting foreign minister Amir Khan Muttaqi saying that our relations with the entire world have improved, and also the Western accusations regarding the presence of the terrorist organizations in Afghanistan are unfounded. As to what happened to be the responsibility of the de facto authorities in Afghanistan with the back-to-back heinous terrorist acts happening in Pakistan with the use of Afghan soil. But we see by these statements that there happened to be a repeated pattern of denial regarding the presence of the terrorist groups on Afghan soil by the de facto authorities in Afghanistan. Let me quickly bring in our esteemed panel of guests who are joining us in the studio. Mr. Jauhar Saleem, his former Foreign Secretary and President, Institute of Regional Studies at the moment. Mr. Saleem, thank you very much for your time, for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. Also in the studio, we are honored to have been joined by Dr. Salma Malik, expert in international relations. Dr. Salma, thank you very much for your time also for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. On Skype at the same time, we are honored to have been joined by Mr. Arshad Yusufzai, his Afghan affairs expert. Mr. Yusufzai, thank you very much for your time also for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. If you both allow me, let me begin the discussion with Mr. Yusufzai. Mr. Yusufzai, the mention of Hafiz Gul Bahadur Group in this particular press release by Inter-Services Public Relations that happened to be the perpetrator of this particular heinous act of terrorism on Banu cantonment. What is this Hafiz Gul Bahadur Group? Where does it get its origin from? And what's the difference? How is it differentiated from Band Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan?
Well, thank you for having me on your show. Hafiz Gul Bahadur is one of the senior most terrorist leaders, I would say. Even before the formation of the TTP, he was present, he was fighting against the state of Pakistan. In the past, he had a couple of, or more than a couple of peace agreements with Pakistani authorities, but then he would violate and his forces would violate it. So he became an enemy of the state and he escaped to Afghanistan. Hafiz Gul Bahadur hails from North Waziristan. That's where his forces or his terrorists are mainly present. Probably between 2,000 and 3,000 people, so it's said about them. But when we talk about Banu and Laki Marwat Tang, these are the closest areas to North Waziristan. Approximately 1,000 terrorists affiliated to the Hafiz Gul Bahadur group are supposed to be there. These are the people who are present there. Their weapons, as we know, most of them have come from Afghanistan. After the takeover of the country by the Afghan Taliban, when the Americans and NATO forces left their weapons, so most of the terrorists were able to get their hands on cheap weapons, American weapons, and also weapons, particularly in case of Hafiz Gul Bahadur's group, they have weapons made in Germany and Egypt. So these are the weapons that they were able to bring into Pakistan, smuggle into Pakistan. They are in hiding. They don't control any place in Waziristan or Banu or anywhere, but they have their sympathizers who provide them shelter. They are often on the move, traveling at night, traveling in groups of 8 to 10 people like we saw in the recent attack. So that's about the group.
Right, Mr. Yusufzai, how this particular group in particular is differentiated from banned Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan?
Well, Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan, as we know, is a group of many smaller groups as well. Particularly after 2019, Mufti Nur Wali Masood, who is the head of the group, he was able to join together more than 35 smaller groups and combine them into one group, including one of the most ferocious groups, Jamaat al-Ahrar. So those are the groups mostly hailing from South Waziristan, but also from other tribal districts. That is from Khyber, from Orakzai, from Moman, Bajor, and the Taliban who were able to escape Pakistani areas after military operations in Swat and Dir. So that's a different group. They are mostly targeting security forces. That's been going on before Zarb-e-Azb in 2014. And even though, after the fall of the government in Afghanistan, where the Afghan Taliban and Pakistani Taliban fought together hands in hands against NATO forces, Hafiz Gul Bahadur stayed on a different stage. Their most preferred modus operandi is target killing. They're alleged or they're accused of taking out targets in North Waziristan, particularly youth, people who speak against them, and security forces as well. They rarely carry out coordinated attacks like they did in Banu, and this is the second time they have attacked a military installation. Previously, they attacked the CTD headquarters in Banu, and this time it was the cantonment. So that's how they operate differently. Their motive is different as well.
I seek your pardon for the interjection over here. You already mentioned that the Tehrik-e-Taliban Afghanistan and banned Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan stood along each other. They fought together against the international troops, but Hafiz Gul Bahadur group was not part of that particular alliance or the collaboration the TTA and TTP had at that particular time. So that naturally brings us to question as to the treatment in the current situation that is unfolding in Afghanistan, as to what sort of treatment this particular group as compared to the treatment banned Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan gets from the de facto authorities in Afghanistan. I'll come back to you to take your deeper understanding regarding that. Let me proceed towards Mr. Saleem. Mr. Saleem, this particular group, how do you look at the treatment that is meted to this particular group, the history and the kind of dynamics this particular group, how does it differentiate itself from banned Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan? What's, as per your understanding, is the treatment that is being meted towards this particular group as compared to the treatment towards TTP from the Afghan Taliban?
I mean, the fact is that as the statement very clearly brings out, the Foreign Office statements on this, the Foreign Office statement as well as the ICPR statement, this group, along with TTP, they have found safe havens in Afghanistan and they operate from Afghan soil. And that is very unfortunate. Regardless of how they are housed there, the very fact that the Afghan government has failed to live up to its promises so far, and these promises emanate from the very day that they took over Kabul. They had promised not just to Pakistan, but to the whole world, 3 or 4 things. One was that they would have an inclusive government. The second was that they would not allow their soil, the Afghan soil, to be used by any terrorist group against any country. And then there was another one saying that they would try to establish friendly relations with neighboring countries and other countries in the world. And then there was some about the internal sort of, their treatment of their own citizens. But what we have seen is, so far as this particular promise was concerned, they have not even tried to live up to this promise. And that is very unfortunate, because Pakistan has always helped Afghanistan. The Afghan people, millions of who have lived in Pakistan as Afghan refugees, and during all the troubled times that Afghanistan has faced, Pakistan has been a steadfast ally always of the Afghan people. And it was rightfully expected that the Taliban government in Afghanistan, which is not recognized internationally as we know, Even Pakistan has sort of, okay, they have their sort of diplomatic mission here, but the de jure recognition is not enjoyed by the Afghan government in relation to Pakistan and any other country in the world. Then again, Pakistan really helps them in terms of the transit trade, because Afghanistan, as we know, is a landlocked country, and a big part of the revenue of the Taliban regime in Afghanistan comes from the trade from Pakistan, the custom duties that they levy on trade from Pakistan. Without that trade, Afghanistan would probably, the Afghan economy would perhaps be not viable. And there's so many other, avenues of assistance that Pakistan has provided to the Afghans over the years, in terms of so many projects that Pakistan did in Afghanistan. Thousands and thousands of Afghan students were given scholarships in Pakistan. And, after all that, but, it was expected, and it is still expected, that they would at least ensure that from their soil, no attacks are orchestrated on Pakistan. And what we have seen, on the contrary, we have seen that in the last 2 years, the number of attacks, the intensity of attacks, the killings that the attacks have caused on a yearly basis, on a monthly basis, on a weekly basis, has increased tremendously. And the cost, in terms of not just the innocent lives lost, not just in terms of the lives of the law enforcement agency personnel lost, but also in terms of the instability and insecurity that it causes, and the damage it causes to the economy is just tremendous. And that is why we have seen again and again, not just statements from Pakistan, but very serious endeavors from Pakistan to engage the Afghans. And very recently, you would recall that in Doha, there were sort of, parleys between Afghans and Pakistani authorities on this very subject. And the fact that, and the many assurances were given during those talks. And even after that, this blatant attack, which has been traced to this, of course, Gul Bahadur group, which we know is based in Afghanistan. This is unacceptable. And that is something which these statements have brought out very unequivocally and very unambiguously, that Pakistan will not tolerate that. And in the past, we have seen not just words, but we have seen actions from Pakistan. But we hope that the Afghan government would realize that, if they want, and they are really striving for international recognition, they cannot move towards that if they are unable to stop the use of their territory by the terrorist groups. And the fact is that terrorism is a common enemy. It's not just hurting Pakistan, it's hurting them as well. There are many terrorist groups which are attacking them as well, So you can't because you see, you can't discriminate between the terrorists, There has to be a common friend, and there has to be a united action, and there has to be an equally equally effective endeavors by not just Pakistan but Afghanistan, and together, I think, by working together, this menace of terrorism, which is hurting both the countries, can be countered.
Right. I'll come back to you to understand as to the realization, when that particular realization among the ranks of the Afghan Taliban could be seen. With you already mentioning about that phenomenon of international recognition also, and that particular phenomenon, where and when can that particular thing can be used in order to make them realize or incentivize them to fulfill their international obligation. Dr. Salma, now Pakistan has asked the interim Afghan authorities to have an effective, robust and immediate investigation into this particular incident, and also prevent recurrence of such attacks from Afghanistan's soil. Do you expect any sort of cooperation from the interim Afghan authorities, or do you see that particular pattern of denial continue in the future as well?
Thank you so much. Unfortunately, I don't think it's going to be a very optimistic response. It's going to be more or less a continuity of how these symptomatic and customary responses have been. They would say that we'll carry out the investigation. Even if they do something in this regard of carrying out an investigation, that investigation would be nothing more than just giving a clean sheet that we have looked around and we have asked the relevant people, and there is an absolute denial. There is not the use of Afghan soil against Pakistan. We stand by our commitment. You are breaching the norms. You are doing this. You are giving us a bad name, etc. So it's going to remain actually the same old merry-go-round in this regard. And this is unfortunate because the more the time is being spent, the more there is this limited higher echelon connectivity for counterterrorism, the more the space for these terrorist groups to operate. And also that we need to keep in mind that even for the Afghan Taliban, the TTP or factions such as that of Gul Bahadur and others are very, very important, as they have several of their own demons and some very bad demons to fight. So they don't really want to antagonize them beyond a certain point. Yes, if the situation becomes too difficult, just like pre 9/11, they would ask Osama bin Laden, the Zawahiris and others of the world that situation is becoming tough. We have been asked to hand you over. Would you like to go, or I mean your hospitality is finished, but you remain here as long as you feel like. So, and they remain there, and the 9/11 happened, and then there's this entire story to talk about. But the very fact is that Afghanistan at this moment, the point that Ambassador Jauhar has talked about, the international recognition, it's very important. However, having said that, I think there is a quasi recognition accorded to the Taliban administration by none less than the US itself, which actually sought a safe exit from no one but the Taliban through Doha. So they have legitimized them, and they have several of their own problems to look into, and they have opened several other fronts as well. Then to come back to Afghanistan and get sucked into the quagmire that Afghanistan is, and they have made this mistake, a very costly mistake in the first place. And not only have they left weapons to them, they have left a lot of training for them, they have left everything to the Taliban. So why would the Taliban feel any heat or international pressure? Coming from a very sane mindset, the heat and the pressure should be there, they should feel it. But the fact is that despite having international travel bans, beside being PNGs and several other things, many people in the Afghan administration are going to the relevant capitals which matter to them, and they're talking to them, and that is fine enough. No one is doing anything to them. How much can you sanction? I mean, there's also a limit to the sanctions. So you can't sanction a very sanctioned entity in any place. So they are enjoying
so
this
if they're
free
going
zone.
to the major capitals, the capitals which actually matter to them, they're talking, they're having the engagements.
Absolutely.
Most recently we saw Doha 3 format happening also under the auspices of the United Nations also now. There is a statement that has been made by the acting foreign minister of the Islamic Emirate, the de facto authorities in Afghanistan, according to which they have claimed that their relations in different domains have improved with the entire world.
Yes. Yes.
So that brings us naturally understand that this particular statement
Yes, that is the point,
carries the
because
weight.
that is kind of being incentivizing them. Okay, fair enough, we won't recognize you. Fair enough, you won't get an seat in the UN Security Council's meeting or the UNGA meeting. However, you're free to go and do whatever you feel like doing. You can kill your neighbor to kingdom come, and we're not going to bat an eyelash because we're too busy to make mess elsewhere in the world. So this is how it is happening. I mean, even when the US could not negotiate with the Taliban and Pakistan kept on telling them not to come so hard initially, they did what they wanted to do and they messed up. Then they went back to Pakistan's formula. Once they found the opening, they shunned Pakistan back. So Pakistan has been facing the heat throughout. It has been blamed time and again, but the fact is that no one really realizes that giving them this grey zone to operate is not only empowering the Taliban regime to a point where their defiance is hurting, for the moment, us, but in the future several other entities as well, and that may actually include the US. But at the moment, China, India, all of them are fine with that, because Pakistan, for India, Pakistan provides that filter. China has a very different way of looking at the global politics, and their way of looking at diplomacy and all are very different.
Salma, what could be the alternative way of engaging with the Afghan Taliban?
Well, the alternative way of engaging with the Taliban, number one, of course, is that those big capitals who are investing big time, who have a strong footprint in China, in Afghanistan, they need to talk to the Afghan Taliban, China basically included, that they have to match up to their performance on different indicators, or there won't be any trade or any commerce or any de facto recognition or conversation. But here the point is that China also does not agree with the Western world. The Western world doesn't really care what is happening in Afghanistan. So again, it goes into that open zone. But Pakistan and China and the Afghan regime can come together and have a serious dialogue over how the consequence of this research in terrorism and terrorist actors in Afghanistan is going to impact CPEC, BRI, any future trade and commerce, whether it is horizontal or vertical grid, all of those concern. And if today it's Pakistan which is voicing its concern, tomorrow it's going to be the other capitals as well.
Right. Let me take this particular point to Mr. Saleem. Mr. Saleem, when it comes to the international engagement with the de facto authorities in Afghanistan, what, as per your understanding, could be an alternative? Firstly, do you agree with what Dr. Salma had to say regarding the kind of engagement that is already happening? The representatives of the Afghan Taliban going and having engagements in the major capitals that actually matter. So, do you agree with that particular actually aims at legitimizing in a way the authority of the Afghan Taliban in Afghanistan? And if not, what could be the alternative way of engagement with them?
Well, the de facto, like I said, de jure recognition hasn't been there. No country has really accorded them the full de jure recognition. But in terms of de facto recognition, many countries are engaging with them, including Western countries and the US, which has engaged in the past, as Dr. Salma mentioned. And presently as well, there are channels that Western countries have with the Taliban. China has, in fact, they've gone beyond others. Then Russia has their diplomatic channels as well, and many others. I think but most of the engagement internationally, in international terms, when we talk about international travel, that is primarily Doha, which housed an office of Taliban, even at the time when the Taliban were a resistance force and they had not taken over Kabul. So that predates their takeover of Kabul and the current regime. So that has been the primary, channel which many others have used as well. Now, how far can we make use of that? I think what is needed is concerted action, and Pakistan has been trying, to promote understanding in that regard. I mean, some understanding already existed, of course, because at the time when Pakistan did not recognize, after the fall of Kabul, when Pakistan did not recognize, unexpectedly, for many Western countries, the expectation was that Pakistan would recognize, and that did not happen. The basic point was that Pakistan said, we will go with the international community and we will not unilaterally take a decision. And we had actually then favored this approach as an approach, a collective approach. And we have stayed steadfast on that. And now is the time, more than ever before perhaps, that a collective approach should be put in practice, because this is not just a threat for Pakistan. Eventually, and this is what the other countries need to recognize as well.
So I would try to analyze that decision at that particular time of the Pakistani authorities going with the collective wisdom of not giving that recognition to the interim Afghan authorities. Had Pakistan done that or gone the other way around, could the picture have been different for Pakistan this time around, and we wouldn't have seen such a resurgence of terrorism yet?
I don't think so. In fact, we would have lost a card then. We would have lost a big card, which we still have, because that recognition card is still with Pakistan. But I think going with that the collective approach, going with the international community was the right choice at the time. And Pakistan is still, as I said, we are still, steadfastly aligned with the international community on Afghanistan. Because see, the terrorist threat from the Afghanistan soil is not just for Pakistan. We know that the TTPs and other terrorists from there have been targeting the Chinese, or the CPAC, or and other countries also feel threatened. And eventually, we all know what happened. When the terrorist groups, when they had really prospered in Afghanistan the last time, then the world had to subsequently suffer the consequences after the 9/11 attacks in the US. So this is, and I see a lot of indications that Western countries are also closely watching the developments in Afghanistan in terms of the spread of these terrorist groups there. And that is why we need an approach whereby there needs to be a greater recognition amongst countries other than Pakistan, because we are, those countries in some ways, that they have stakes as well, and because the whole world has a stake in that Afghanistan does not become what it was previously, as a place where all the these terrorist groups abound, and they spread to the point where then they start endangering other countries. Now Pakistan is the first in that in that line. We are the vanguard of that battle again, unfortunately, and we have in the past suffered huge consequences in terms of the $140 billion of economic losses and 100,000 lives lost. And this is unfortunately in the last 2-3 years, a couple of years, it has started happening again. And the world must not leave Pakistan alone in this fight, because this is not just Pakistan's fight alone. This is, this is eventually, because this is about global terrorist networks, and these networks, while eventually, while initially they say, okay, our objective is, for this particular region or whatever, but gradually, as this kind of, as they are able to make any progress in their nefarious designs, they become more ambitious, and then they spread their objectives far beyond that. We have seen that it happening in the past, and I think that is why it is very important that Pakistan not only puts pressure on Afghanistan on a bilateral plane, which Pakistan is doing, and there's so many options available to Pakistan. As I said, the kinetic option is there, which Pakistan has employed before as well. The diplomatic option is there, which is being employed currently. Then the option in terms of the trade and other leverages that we have, those are there. But also the option for for unifying, for having a unified approach by all the stakeholders in terms of the countries, not just in the region, but beyond this region. And I think Pakistan is doing that as well. And in the coming days and in the coming months, we will probably see a greater recognition. In that regard.
You've already talked about the West watching as to what the developments in Afghanistan under the Taliban happening. There has been the release of the 15th report by the monitoring team to the United Nations Security Council. Also, now there is a statement that has been made by Amir Khan Muttaqi. I'll come back to you, take your analysis regarding as to what that particular statement depict about how that particular information as to what is happening in Afghanistan is taken and based, which happened to be the basis of that particular opinion for the West, in particular as to the presence of the terrorist networks there. Mr. Yusufzai, you already in earlier take talked about the difference between the Band Tehrik-e-Taliban, Pakistan and Hafiz Gul Bahadur group. Now, as the TTP, as you mentioned, fought alongside the TTA, and Hafiz Gul Bahadur group did not at that particular time against the international troops withdraw, against the international troops. Now, do we understand that there would be naturally a different treatment as to the Hafiz Gul Bahadur group as compared to Band Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan, both of which are using the Afghan soil under the Afghan Taliban?
No, I think there will be no different treatment. It will be the same. And one of the reasons behind my opinion is the Afghan Taliban have been saying that whoever is staying in Afghanistan, whoever is fighting against their states, we cannot force them out of the country. And that's as per their interpretation of the Sharia. So it's going to remain the same. Second point is that my colleagues mentioned earlier that. Can you hear me?
Please go ahead.
Yeah. So I was saying that the Afghan Taliban would not treat them differently. It will be the same treatment for both. And the reason is that Afghan Taliban have been saying that anyone who is hiding there or who is fighting their country, their forces, their government, and are sheltering in Afghanistan, although they don't say that the TTP and Hafiz Bahadur group or others are hiding in Afghanistan, but they say that as per their interpretation of the Islamic Sharia, they cannot force anybody out of the country, like my esteemed colleagues mentioned earlier about Osama bin Laden and others. So it will be the same. No one is going to threaten them. No one will be forcing them. And then the Afghan Taliban cannot afford to fight against them. The reason is that they have already fought against the NRF. They have been fighting against ISK, and they don't want to have another enemy. If we go back in history, 2 years ago, when one of the top military commanders of the Taliban, the TTP, Umar Khalid Khurasani, was killed in Paktika, both the TTP and the Afghan Taliban feared that his followers in their hundreds who were previously Jamaat al-Ahrar might join ISK, and some of them did. So it was a headache for the Afghan Taliban. That's what the Afghan Taliban would not want to happen in their country. But when we come to talk about how they have been treating others, I would want to mention the Afghan Taliban's treatment of ETIM, that's the East Turkestan Islamic Movement, which was a headache for the Chinese, the Uyghurs who are there. We know for sure that all those fighters in their hundreds or maybe a couple of thousands, probably 2,000, they have been sort of brought into one place near Faizabad in Badakhshan. They are inside a camp. They are not allowed to go out. They are not allowed to carry weapons, unlike the TTP and Hafiz Bahadur people in Afghanistan. So if the Afghan Taliban wanted to achieve anything or something, they can do it. Likewise, with the Americans, they have been sharing intel. They have been cooperating against ISK. So they have the capacity to do these things. But I don't think they would do it against TTP and Gul Bahadur group.
So what is the primary reason for that? What holds them back from taking a decisive action against banned TTP in particular?
Well, I've mentioned one reason already, that they don't want to have another front to fight. They don't want extra enemies. They don't want people who can have a say, who can influence people in
ISK or ETIM. Doesn't that open different fronts for them?
There is a reason behind. ISK does not share same ideology, Islamic ideology, like the TTP, like the Afghan Taliban, like Hafiz Bahadur. They are the Deobandis, while ISK is the Salafis. So the people belonging to ISK have no or little capacity to hire people. But when it comes to TTP, they can easily hire people because they have the same ideology, and they have the same language and culture, and then they have relations on both sides of the border. So it is a threat for TTP, that for Afghan Taliban, and they know about it. That's why they wouldn't do it.
Right. So when we talk about this recent incident that happened in Banu cantonment, the loss of 8 brave sons of soil, they got martyred. Pakistani authorities asking the interim Afghan authorities to take an immediate, robust action regarding that, also going into investigation. Do you expect any sort of cooperation this time around by the interim Afghan authorities?
I think it will be the same answer, that Afghan Taliban would say they did not come from Afghanistan, that they were already present in Pakistan, that Pakistan should sort their own house, that they should secure their own border. So I doubt anything extraordinary will happen this time.
So what options remain at the hands of the Pakistani authorities? As already mentioned by Mr. Saleem, Pakistan has been trying to engage diplomatically. Also, there's the option of kinetic actions as well, and a unified approach, specifically when we talk about the regional approach, is also required. So what options in the immediate terms do you think Pakistan could have in order to impress upon or pressurize the interim Afghan authorities to take a decisive action against these groups in particular?
Well, it's certainly not force or threatening attacks inside Afghanistan. Mr. Saleem rightly mentioned involving international community. The problem here is that no one else is getting hurt. When we talk about terrorism, when we talk about international terrorism, unfortunately, it's only hurting Pakistan. If it is TTP, if it is Gul Bahadur, or even if it is ISK present in Afghanistan, they are not targeting anyone else but Pakistan. No one is going to Iran, to China, to Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, or Tajikistan. So the international community at the moment, they're not bothered, I would say. But when it comes to the Chinese, for example, who are our best or closest friends, I'll go back to a recent incident of last year when there were Chinese engineers killed. The Afghan Taliban were able to dig out deep information, and they were able to find and capture and punish the culprits within 2 weeks. So that's the kind of engagement they have. We don't have that access. We don't have that level of interaction with Afghan Taliban right now. I think the only way for us, I still agree with this because I've been meeting these Afghan Taliban since they started talking to the West in 2008, late 2008. And I've seen how they operate. It's only through peace process. It's only through involving intermediaries. There are people, there are organizations, there are states who could help us, because it's right now it is our issue, and I doubt it is going to become anyone else's issue unless Daesh becomes big and important and powerful enough to go out of Afghanistan.
Right, Dr. Salma, what's your understanding as to how to impress upon the Taliban? Mr. Yusufzai has talked about involving the Afghan Taliban into a peace process, involving the intermediaries into this particular process in order to impress upon them, to make them to fulfill that international obligation.
Yusufzai Saab's assessment is very on the dot. He has been interacting with these people. He has been interviewing them and knows the mindset. There are a couple of things. Number one, the Banu attack is not an isolated occurrence that just happened. The Hafiz Gul Bahadur group has been involved previously in North Waziristan as well, and attacking security forces. So they have developed a pattern. So of course the first and the knee-jerk reaction of course is to pursue the Hafiz Gul Bahadur group and try and catch hold of them, try and see who the perpetrators were, who were the main people, who were the handlers, etc. So that has to go, and a lot of intel and several other factors would go into that. But that's the least bit of thing, because that's just one group which is doing whatever it is doing, and it has strayed away from its previous dormant, peaceful relation with the state of Pakistan, the good Taliban turning the bad Taliban now. So what has happened, and we have to see how these trajectories are developing from positive into negatives. Can we really stop that? So we also need to figure out as to where, in the non-kinetic term, as Ambassador Saleem has mentioned the term kinetic, we have to do some homework and figure out as to what are the points of intervention, where can we actually impress upon the Taliban regime sitting in Afghanistan, in Kabul, that these are the areas which are very imperative for us to work upon. But from where I look at it, they don't really feel compelled to cooperate with Pakistan, because they are in pretty euphoric state that they are being quoted or kind of given this de facto recognition or somewhat of a legitimacy by certain actors who think that for the moment Afghanistan should rest in peace and we will come back to this project as and when it is required. Also, we need to see that this is that ugly face of insurgency, militancy, where weapons, proxies, militant actors whom we may think are not part of one side are working for a plethora of factors at subnational level, national level, beyond that, and so many other factors. We also need to see that we have right in our neighborhood, India, which is always trying to look at some opportunity to hurt Pakistan, and it has the type of ingress into Afghanistan, it has the type of money to put into Afghanistan through which it can motivate such militant actors who are actually guns for hire. We consider them to be Islamic militants who have an ideology which is fixed upon certain aspects, but they are actually quite exploitable, and they are doing what they need to do. Whosoever gives them the biggest bidding, they fire the gun for them. So we need also to figure out who are the hands behind the gun, and can we really, because we several times we talk about the hidden hand, but we need to bring that hidden hand to the fore and figure out how to deal with that. And if the Indian regime is also helping Taliban in any capacity, because they have been doing that at various instances, we have to be more cautious and see what are those fractures that we are developing in our direct interaction with the Taliban regime that need to be plugged, that need to be worked on better to make such eventualities not happen in the longer run.
Oh, okay, so you mentioned when you talk specifically about Indian hand,
yeah,
as to the situation in Afghanistan and also the kind of help the Afghan Taliban might be getting from them. So doesn't that make us naturally question as to the kind of help the previous administrations under Ashraf Ghani and Hamid Karzai were getting from India during the Afghan peace and reconciliation process, that particular peace spoiler, India being at that particular time? How come the Afghan Taliban, of which the Ashraf Ghani's government and Hamid Karzai's governments were the enemies, could accept that help from Indians against Pakistan?
I don't think that there was any anti-India stance with the Taliban when it came to Afghan-Taliban relation with India-Pakistan in a triangular thing. So long as there is someone who is fulfilling their interest, who is listening to them, who is providing them with the type of help that they require, they are more than accommodating to any actors. They are actually reaching out to as many countries as possible that can provide them the platform through which they can speak. And this is what is happening in India. Indian leadership is very shrewd, and we need not underwrite the Afghan Taliban leadership if we think that they are Islamic mullahs who are not well versed with international diplomacy. Then we need to really go back to the scoreboard and figure out where we have gone wrong. They are a very, very smart, shrewd people who have been seasoned by the US, by many actors who have come to them to seek permits in Afghanistan for the iron and the copper and so many other factors that Afghanistan has to offer. And even at the peak of US presence in Afghanistan, under Ashraf Ghani, under Karzai, the main permit for exploiting the land was with the Taliban. And usually it would be said that the ministries, when they issue the NOCs, they are just a piece of document. The actual power rests with the Taliban. So that is how this thing was happening, and the Indians had their work figured out very well, and they are playing on all platforms, all sides, and so long as they are serving the Taliban's interest, Talibans are going to be very happy with them as well.
Right. Mr. Saleem, as you already mentioned, the West watching as to what is unfolding in Afghanistan. There is a statement by Amir Khan Muttaqi also questioning as to the validity of the information on the basis of which they formed that opinion of the presence of the terrorist outfits in Afghanistan is based. Let me quote that. Sometimes they talk about the human rights, sometimes about women's rights, and sometimes they say that Al-Qaeda and other groups are present. Perhaps I think he is referring to that particular recently released report by the UN monitoring team that was submitted to the Security Council. Goes on to say, through what mechanism do you obtain this information? Thousands of kilometers away, you gather information from certain biased sources and enemies of Afghanistan and publish it under the name of documented information.
Well, I mean,
what does that depict? It's a quite detailed rebuttal of that particular report, I guess, if it is referring to that one.
Yeah, so the rebuttal actually clearly suggests that there has been that international outcry, and perhaps not even public outcry as much, but perhaps in the contacts, the engagements that have taken place directly or indirectly, this point must have been impressed upon, and that is why they have come up with such a strong worded rebuttal. But the fact remains that, in Afghanistan, there's so many terrorist groups, who have found refuge. And as Dr. Salma mentioned, the unfortunate reality is also that countries such as India, with Ajit Doval's policy of defensive offense, whereby he is on record having stated that they'll make Pakistan bleed and they will use such proxy groups where it would benefit them. And we have seen instances where money or through supply of weapons, such groups, including the TTP, have been held by the Indians. And I think that is something the countries by far, so far should have learned, because this lesson all countries need to learn, that if you support terrorism directly or indirectly, eventually it can come to haunt you. We also have to all recognize that there are about a dozen conventions against terrorism, UN conventions against terrorism, which makes it incumbent upon all countries to not only disassociate, but actually help towards efforts to combat terrorism. And countries such as India, who are flouting those conventions directly or indirectly, and countries, other countries which have, by not actively supporting this lone battle that Pakistan is waging right now, I think in some ways, because silence does not help, and that is why I think a unified approach needs to be taken, and that will be the interest of all countries of the region and beyond this region eventually.
Mr. Jauhar Saleem, former Foreign Secretary and President, Institute of Regional Studies, thank you very much for taking time out for Views on News tonight. Really appreciate that. Dr. Salma Malik, expert in international relations, thank you very much for your time also for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. Mr. Arshad Yusufzai joining us on Skype, Afghan affairs expert. Mr. Yusufzai, thank you very much for your time also for being with us on the show tonight. We really appreciate that. With that, we come to the end of today's episode. Till the next one, take good care of yourselves.